This investigation is sponsored by King Art Games. Join us on Twitch 1 hour after this video goes live as we command the Usonian Expeditionary Corps and give away a bunch of Iron Harvest merchandise.
Since the first navigators spied its shores from the decks of their sailing ships, the affairs of the New World have been considered at most ancillary to those of Europa. As the age of discovery gave way to the era of colonialism, the American continents were viewed merely as prizes to be won or obstacles to be overcome on the path to the far grander territories of the Orient. Even when Europa's greatest colonial holdings in the New World were lost to the fires of revolution, the declaration of a new sovereign republic in their place was dismissed as a charming experiment. What has taken place in America, one of the famous philosophers of Saxony declared, is but an emanation of Europa. The New World is only an echo of the old. But within the greatest state of that New World, a different narrative has formed. Its citizens see in themselves a nation where the sacred rights of mankind are not bestowed by old parchments or musty records, but won through costly sacrifices on the altar of freedom. They work not for the betterment of those born with noble title, but to build a land where every man might be a king. Perhaps more so than any other nation across the world, the Federal Union of Usonia has been carved from its philosophy, not its history. And if the words of its founding fathers are to be believed, then like some majestic river which enlarges and widens as it approaches its parent ocean, Usonia is destined to become greater and greater through every age and outlive the ruins of the world itself. Usonia stretches across the breadth of the American continent, bordered to the east and west by the largest oceans of the world, and to the north and south by the Dominion of Laurentia and the United States of Aztlan, respectively. Its overseas territories extend to the Poniente Archipelago, the Hawaiian Islands, and many other small atolls across the Pacific to the Grand Canal and the Coabana Islands in the Caribbean. It is a vast nation, third only in size to the Soviet Union and its northern rival. Within its borders can be found every manner of natural wonder, towering mountain ranges and river valleys giving way to vast plains, tan deserts, and verdant tropics. The Usonian people are as diverse as the landscapes they inhabit. A nation of immigrants, the concept of Usonian nationality is not linked to any race or ethnic group, but rather their shared history and cherished values. Foreign expatriation is seen as an integral right, and once a person has taken the Usonian Oath of Allegiance, they enjoy all the rights of citizenship, no matter their ethnicity, creed, or culture. They may even retain their former citizenship and every bond of fellowship with their home country, so long as their loyalty to Usonia is paramount. Binding the lands and peoples of Usonia together are 48 constituent states. The first 19 of these can trace their history to European colonies that fought for independence during the Revolutionary Wars, while the remainder were federal territories or sovereign states absorbed into the Greater Usonian Union. Each state is allotted various levels of power according to their individual constitutions, but all are grounded in republican principles and bound to federal law. While each state was initially responsible for managing most of their internal affairs, such as infrastructure, law enforcement, public education, and public health, these services have been increasingly centralized under the federal government, leading to continued tensions and debate over the nature of states' rights. The Usonian federal government is based in the capital city of Washington, itself located within the District of Columbia. Here, the office of the Usonian President, the Usonian Congress, and Supreme Court of Usonia hold authority over the nation's executive department, legislature, and judicial system. The power and duties of these branches, as well as their relationship with state governments, are vested by the Usonian Constitution and further defined by acts of Congress. While major offices, including those of the president, congressmen, and state governors, are elected by popular vote, many others are held political appointees. Nearly all elected officials are members of either the Democratic Republican Party or the Federalist Party. While other smaller political parties exist, Usonia exists in practical terms under a two-party system. First among the many issues that will decide Usonian elections is the role of the armed forces in foreign affairs. With the nation's ascent to one of the world's largest industrial powers has come an extensive rearmament campaign. The four major branches of the Usonian armed forces are the Usonian Army, Usonian Navy, Usonian Marine Corps, and the Usonian Coast Guard. Each has been modernized in the previous decade to include the mechanized walkers and exosuits prevalent in European armies since the height of the Great War. An all-volunteer force, the Usonian army is comparatively tiny next to the vast formations mobilized in Europa. It is not even the largest armed group in Usonia, outnumbered by the private security personnel within the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. When asked how the Empire would respond should a Usonian expeditionary force land on its shores, the Emperor of Saxony is said to have remarked that he would simply have them arrested. Yet, such mockery overlooks the extraordinary esprit de corps present across the Usonian military. Its soldiers have developed an international reputation for sheer nerve and bravery bordering on recklessness. During the Great War, a Usonian volunteer regiment was ordered by its Frankish attaché to retreat, and the response, "Retreat? Hell, we just got here," has become a rallying cry across the entire Usonian army. The army is also extraordinarily well equipped and highly mechanized. The M29 Salem is not entirely dissimilar from its European counterparts, but contains several novel design choices, while the M19 Knox can go toe-to-toe with even the largest walkers operated by Saxony or the Rus-Viet Union. The nation's extraordinary innovations in walker design could be attributed in part to the prominent Usonian industrialists whose enormous corporations have made them celebrities in their own right. The Henry Ford Motor Company, General Motors, and many other Usonian manufacturing firms have gained renown for their improvements over European designs and become major suppliers of the Usonian armed forces. But it is the Edison Electric Company that single-handedly transformed the nature of warfare. While critics and even Tesla himself have claimed that the EEC merely stole designs from his legendary European factory, Thomas Edison's work has produced some of the most groundbreaking machines of the last decade. Enormous airships, many the size of the battleships that ply the world's oceans, spearhead the advance of the Usonian army, escorted by fleets of smaller craft. Completely immune to river crossings, mountain passes, and the other traditional impediments of land campaigns, they have in the span of just a few years rendered entire armies obsolete. While the various classes of flying gunships, airlifts, and skybikes have made their way into every modern army, only the Usonian Air Mobile Corps currently fields what might be classified a flying aircraft carrier. The ZR-25 Samson has no equal across the world, capable of deploying an armada of automated drones to drop ordnance onto distant targets. These enormous airships are frequently escorted by the ZR-3 Revere, which can provide fire support against both enemy walkers and rival airships. While Edison's craft were not the first of such vessels to take to the sky, with scattered European prototypes developed in the first few years of the 20th century, their ubiquity within Usonian service, and in particular the journey of the Great White Fleet, has made them synonymous with the New World. Yet their increasing presence above Usonian cities, together with the nation's growing militarization, have created a widening political rift in the country. There are those who wish to use these vessels to acquire the colonies and prestige that mark the other great powers of the world, and there are others who proclaim that such actions are un-Usonian, a terrible betrayal of the nation's founding values. A revolutionary state, Usonian society has always had a complex relationship with militarism, colonialism, and imperialism. The nation was born from a series of conflicts spanning a 30-year period that began in the late 18th century. What became known as the Usonian Revolutionary Wars pitted colonial states in both modern Usonia and Laurentia against the great powers of Europa. The belligerents on either side and the motives behind the wars shifted as the conflict evolved and expanded, but generally stemmed from strict taxation policies and a lack of colonial representation. By the time the last European colonial possession in Eusonia had capitulated to revolutionary armies, hundreds of thousands lay dead on both sides, with many times that lost to disease and famine. The wars led to the centralization of Usonian republics into what would become the modern Federal Union, but also brought about rapid socio-economic change. The destruction of the traditional Usonian upper-class system during the wars against Europa, the growing concentration of wealth into urban areas, the integration of historically marginalized or disenfranchised groups into army units, and the high-profile exploits of those soldiers led to the collapse of Usonian slavery within a generation of the war's end. While racial and ethnic tensions would persist, full suffrage was afforded to every citizen. This social change at times threatened to destabilize the still fragile Usonian Union, but the nation became increasingly expansionistic. In the belief that Eusonia was destined to expand across North America, one given form in the concept of manifest destiny, Usonian settlers pressed relentlessly westward, coming into conflict with both the local indigenous tribes and successionist state governments. The major causes behind the Usonian Civil War were complex and have been controversial ever since, but pitted the so-called federal states against those on the Pacific coast. The federal victory in 1875 came only after 4 years of brutal fighting, which remains to this day the deadliest war in Usonian history. The Usonian frontier was declared closed and the continent fully settled in 1890, which proved to be a psychological blow to a nation which had always defined itself by its struggle against the wilderness. The idea of Usonian exceptionalism flourished in its stead, culminating in the first circumnavigation of airships known as the Great White Fleet of 1907 to 1908. A year later, the plight of the Coabanan revolutionaries in their own war of independence against Hispania swayed the Usonian public to their cause. Tensions with Hispania were aggravated by Usonian newspaper moguls, but it was the destruction of the UAS Maine over Havana that ignited the Hispanian-Usonian War. The brief conflict exposed the fatal design flaws of the first-generation airships of the era, briefly ending their widespread use, but also brought to Usonia a wealth of overseas colonies in the aftermath of their victory. Burdened by ongoing insurgencies in their newly acquired colonies, Usonia stayed out of the Great War in Europa. It initially financed both sides before siding against Saxony and its allies with a suspension of all trade. Several Usonian volunteer divisions fought under Frankish, Albionian, or Polonian command, seeing limited action before the end of the war. Spared the devastation that befell Europa, Usonia entered the modern era as the single largest industrial and economic superpower. Initially dismissed by foreign governments as a backwater nation of cowboys and philanderers, its shocking victory over Hispania and its emergence as a world power has forced Europa to acknowledge Usonia as a growing rival for worldwide influence. Its citizens and politicians claim that the 20th century will be Usonia's century, for as Europa struggles to rebuild, the innovation and industry of the New World has never ceased. The fragile airships of the Great White Fleet have been replaced with a modern airborne armada, and a journey that might have taken months in 1908 can now be achieved in mere weeks. A growing fear of the Usonian peril has spread across Europa, for the vast ocean separating these continents is no longer the formidable obstacle it once was. Within Usonia itself, there is a growing sense that the next decades, years, or even months might present the opportunity for the nation to find its place within the world. Since its founding, the country has been guided by its almost utopian philosophy, a philosophy that states Usonia's glory is not in dominion, but in liberty, that she does not go abroad in search of foreign monsters to destroy. In newspapers, the fiery critic Samuel Clemens has rallied millions against the nation's descent into imperialism with the words, "We have invited clean young men to shoulder a discredited musket and do bandits' work under a flag which bandits have been accustomed to fear, not to follow. we have debauched Eusonia. Yet the relentless drive westwards, the easy conquests against Hispania, and its own rising status have convinced the growing segment of its citizens that within the nation, a new form of imperialism is in the air. Its advocates claim it has new definitions and better inventions. It is republicanism writ large. It is imperialism not for dominion, but for civilization, not for absolutism, but for self-government. Usonian imperialism, it is said, is enthusiastic, optimistic, and beneficial republicanism. Within the halls of Congress, senators and statesmen eagerly pin flags on world maps, demanding new colonies, new territories, and that wherever the Usonian banner is raised, never must it come down. Seldom mentioned is the terrible price Eusonia has already paid to keep what it has claimed. The fiery speeches and calls to action ignore the massacres of Wounded Knee or the Trail of Tears. It gives no admission to the thousands of deaths among civilians on Coabana or the Poniente archipelago, nor the Usonian-backed revolution that ended the rule of the last Hawaiian kings. It ignores the fact that the weapons used to destroy the USS Maine were well beyond those of the Hispanian nationalists, and that the entire war might have been built upon a lie. Eusonia has entered a crossroads, forced to choose between its national ideals and its national interest, and the fate of the Usonian soul, the fate of the world, might depend upon the outcome of that choice.
Thanks to King Art Games for sponsoring this investigation into the shining city on a hill that is Eusonia. Additionally, thank you to both the writing team over at King Art Games and Jacob Rosalski for allowing the Templin Institute to contribute the backstory of this nation to the universe of 1920+. Eusonia is available to command right now as part of the Operation Eagle DLC for Iron Harvest. If you would like to lead the expeditionary forces into the wild deserts of Arabia, you'll find the link in the description.